Coming out of Terminator Dark Fate, my first thought was, it has all the stuff you'd expect and want in a Terminator movie. But after seeing Star Wars The Force Awakens, you now know better. Following The Terminator and Terminator 2, two which have been childhood favorites for most of the whole planet, we have seen sequel after sequel fail to capture what everyone loved about the first two classics. We had the McDonald's product that was basically Diet Terminator 2. We had the slightest glimpse into the future war from all the intros of the previous Terminator movies that everyone wanted to see, but didn't quite feel like those intros. And then we had the shameless Star Trek 2009 revamping the timeline movie so we can start all over again. If there was any time to get this series back on track and recapture what everyone loved from the first two movies, this was the time. But unfortunately, Terminator Dark Fate is one of the most creatively bankrupt rehashes of what works with no personality or flavor I've ever seen. Now, when this movie was announced, it had piqued my interest. Deadpool director Tim Miller was attached. Deadpool is one of my new favorite movies and I thought it was wonderfully well crafted. James Cameron now had the Terminator rights back and would return to the franchise and bring it back to what he started. And Linda Hamilton would return as Sarah Connor. I was interested and on board. Then it started to lose me. I think early warning signs were Tim Miller's feminist statements. This character will terrify misogynists. To which I was like, what are you doing? One of the best things this franchise had to offer was a world favorite strong female character, and it doesn't even need to be put into words. James Cameron was the front runner for a little bit, responsible for Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley taking charge in a man's world and destroying the ultimate threats. Like SJW dialogue in the 90s was basically this.
Fucking men like you built the hydrogen bomb. You don't know what it's like to really create something, to create a life. Feel it growing inside you. All you know how to create is death and destruction. Mom!
But this character is also accompanied by doing this.
You broke my arm.
There are 215 bones in the human body. That's one.
In this movie, our female character, who is so terrifying to misogynists, has super robotic enhancements, which are essentially gender neutral, and she says things such as, I didn't give you permission to look at my private parts. Sarah Connor, sexually assaulted, then breaks out of her confinement on her own with just her mind and her skills, and then she gets to do this. James Cameron never said Sarah Connor was going to terrify misogynists because misogynists just had to watch her work. But anyway, that's all I'm touching on politics. So that lost me. Then the news broke out that Eddie Furlong would be returning as John Connor. Now, Linda Hamilton returning is fine, even though she had a moment to shine in Terminator 2, but getting Eddie Furlong back into shape and giving us the return of everyone's actual favorite John Connor, that's a good way to win me over. But then you find out he's only in the intro, digitally de-aged, and they get a little girl and a different voice actor performing the young version of John. What the hell was his involvement? But whatever, the trailers then came and nothing looked exciting or new, and to my shock, nearly all of the so-called fan service crowd pleaser moments were all in the trailers, so there was nothing surprising there. But onto the movie itself. I am seeing the sheep mentality justification for this movie being said again and again. Hey man, I actually like the movie. Sure, it's not as good as Terminator 2, but it's never gonna be. And this is the best movie since T2. It's the Terminator 3 we always wanted. And I just want to say, it's the best movie since T2. This is the new favorite copy and paste justification. But it's sickening when you see this movie. This movie is essentially the full plots to The Terminator and Terminator 2 Judgment Day, duct taped together with Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, Terminator Salvation, and Terminator Genesis. All this movie does is borrow, beg, and steal not just minor, but massive plot points, set pieces, and overall ideas from every single movie in this franchise. But since this movie has its head up its own ass, it acts like it's new and original. Every single thing that happens in it, I can tell you which other movie it's already happened in. And I know that not every idea is original anymore, but the Terminator franchise has some very stereotypical themes and elements to it that, when overused, you just can't unsee them when they're repeated. This is the best movie since T2, especially because it ends with Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator sacrificing himself for the survival of humanity, being in a lowering position while Sarah Connor stares down at him with a sad and heartbroken look, while standing next to the young version of the future resistance. Oh yeah, there's a scene earlier when she's reunited with the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator, and she has been suffering from PTSD caused by said Terminator. Everything goes slow motion, this score, and this exact screaming can be heard. It's the best movie since T2, mostly because it is T2, like beat for beat, but misses the mark so much. If Terminator 2 was Thriller, then this is Golimar. It's like, it looks like Thriller, it's trying to be Thriller, but it's just a shameless rehashing so it can make Thriller dollars. But also, what are you? But worst of all, it's all of the Terminator movies shoved into one movie. So this will not be an actual review of the so-called plot, that will be saved for a later video, but what I'm going to do is break down this movie through the other sequels. How this movie has absolutely no identity by taking direct plot points from the others but acts like it isn't, and doesn't improve on them in some instances. So this movie starts off with a bit of nostalgia exploitation. We are treated to the Sarah Connor rant on the video recording from Terminator 2, giving you a reminder as if, you forgot. Starting off with a flashback to a better film in the series with digitally de-aged actors. We have Sarah Connor and John Connor apparently a year later from the events of T2, although it looks like the very next day. We have Terminator Genesis taking place in the original movie with digitally de-aged Arnold Terminator. Both serve the purpose to alter the events of the future than what you're expecting. At some point, another Terminator was sent back in time to protect Sarah Connor as a child, and at some point, another T-800 was sent back to kill John around the time of T2. Why? Don't worry about it. Look over here. Sarah Connor is already trained for combat before meeting Kyle Reese. John is shot in the chest, stopping him from being the leader of the resistance. The death of John Connor having no effect on the apocalypse becomes a main staple of this movie. John is killed before or after the events in the original Terminator 3, depending on how you look at it. That T-800 kills John in the future before his wife and child keep the resistance going, therefore being killed has no effect. At the start of Genesis, right before the resistance is about to destroy Skynet, as Kyle Reese spoke about in the original, John is morphed into a Terminator by another Terminator. This affects nothing as the events will still play out with or without him. Cut to present day. In the past, we have a young girl who plays an important role in the future resistance. And this is a story all about how her life got flipped upside down. Sarah Connor, John Connor, Danny Ramos. Mostly the plot to the original Terminator. She is living her normal life, working a dead-end job. Meanwhile, a resistance soldier from the future is sent back to protect her from a Terminator. We have Kyle Reese versus the T-800, the reprogrammed T-800 versus the T-1000, the reprogrammed T-800 versus the TX, and the reprogrammed T-800 versus the T-800, the T-1000, as well as the T-3000 that's now a zombified robot John Connor. And now Grace versus the Rev-9, but with the help of a guilty T-800, Terminator 1, 2, 3, and Genesis. Also, the time portal ball was always ominous in T2, and in Terminator 3 it's a disco ball. In Genesis it's a wavy blue light show. This movie does the Genesis effect, except everything freezes around it first. The Rev-9 is the new super advanced and wholly original Terminator since the T-800. Even though the T-1000 is the most amazing killing machine ever, why wouldn't Skynet just perfect this model instead of keep taking a step backwards? But anywho, just like the T-1000, the Rev-9 has better infiltration skills and can behave better like a human, unlike the clunky flatness of the T-800. Until they pull a Terminator 3 and forget their own logic, the T-1000 would go all robot once John was in his sights, yet the TX would act like a robot constantly despite being a more advanced model than the T-1000. The filmmakers were like, it's a robot, it's gotta act like a robot, or people won't know it's a robot, despite it being an infiltration unit. Then also like the TX, the Rev-9 is a combination of endoskeleton and liquid metal overlayer. The only difference here is the liquid metal skin can separate to form the human outer layer, but isn't as solid as the indestructible endoskeleton. But also like the TX, when it has the prime opportunity to stay in character and kill its target, it decides to blow its cover in order to become a super badass and cue visual effect. Grace is now the future resistance soldier, but unlike Kyle Reese, she has been enhanced with robotics in order to become a better fighter of Terminators, much like Marcus Wright in Terminator Salvation. Although that was through Skynet, this was through the resistance themselves. This is like an okay new idea. This is similar to what Elon Musk was saying about humans in the future would have to get robot and computer enhancements in order to beat the same level as artificial intelligence, so we aren't beat out. But still, Salvation did it. Also, they have this beehive-like net underskin. Our characters from the future are making their way to the target for protection and/or termination. Grace and Kyle have a scuffle with the authorities. Our villains imitate a loved one. Also, a slow-motion build-up as the Terminator is about to strike their target, disrupted by the protectors. At this point, if you're feeling the burning need to comment saying, excuse me, Terminator 2 reuses all of the beats from Terminator 1, so what even is your point? Kill yourself. I liked the movie. It had sick action. Well, some context for T2. If you all remember back in the ancient times where movies weren't made with trilogies and expanded universe teasing built into its plot, they had to be standalone. The Terminator was a colossal hit, and there was such a high demand for almost a decade to make a sequel. And so, it did the classic sequel things, fan service and references. Come with me if you want to live, I'll be back. But James Cameron took the threats of the first movie and reversed them. The hero of the previous movie becomes the heartless Terminator, and the Terminator from the previous movie becomes the protector. When everyone only knew the love story of Kyle meeting Sarah while on the run from the Terminator, suddenly we have a new complex story of a son who can't connect or relate to his crazy mother, befriends the one thing he is destined to wage war on in the future. The plot goes from being on the run to saving the future, and overall tackled new themes, went to new locations, and ended with purpose. The difference here being, there wasn't hot demand for a Terminator sequel after the previous installment, and we have already 3 movies taking the same elements from what worked in the James Cameron movies and pretending like they're original. Now back to Dark Fate, the best movie since T2. The first act of this movie is essentially the first Terminator, just like Genesis.
Remember the setup that works? Oh yeah, I remember.
Now this is where it basically becomes Terminator 2 beat for beat. Our young lead protagonist who isn't ready for war and their awkward out-of-time robo-friend then acquire the soulless PTSD-driven skills of Sarah Connor. Teaming up with Sarah Connor after the asylum breakout, she just shows up because Arnie texted her saying, "There's a Terminator showing up on the bridge in Mexico. Low, wink emoji, for John, hashtag RIP." Car chase where our protagonists are in a little car and the Terminator is in a bigger car. Sarah, John and the T-800 in a pickup truck and the T-1000 in a tanker truck in T2. John and Catherine Brewster in a pickup truck being chased by the T-X in a giant crane truck from Terminator 3. And in this, as Danny and Grace are in a pickup truck being chased by the Rev 9 in whatever bigger vehicle this is. Oh yeah, hanging out in motels like Kyle and Sarah did in the original. Our main characters are captured and put into custody and require a Terminator attack to be enough of a distraction to get out of there. The T-800 shooting up the police station so captured Kyle Reese can escape with Sarah Connor in the original movie. John Connor is trapped in a doggy cage while the TX is bursting into the building to get him and Catherine Brewster. Saved by the nice guy T-800. Sarah, Kyle, and Pop's T-800 are taken into custody after the bus chase in Genesis. The T-3000 John Connor shows up to cause mischief, then they escape. Terminator Dark Fate, Sarah, Grace, and Danny are captured by the authorities, crossing the border and get detained. Rev 9 shows up and slaughters a whole bunch of people to reach them. He gets so close, but then they escape. Going across the border to meet someone with weapons. Sarah has her contact in Mexico with a massive stash of weapons in preparation for fighting Terminators. Sarah has an unknown contact in Texas who has a massive stash of weapons in preparation for fighting Terminators. Enrique in Terminator 2, and Carl the lovable T-800 who's sad over killing John. Sarah spent years gathering an arsenal of weaponry, storing it in Mexico with Enrique. Carlinator has a wife and kids, and has all these guns just in case, and then makes a shitty joke that's just as bad as "Talk to the Hand" from Terminator 3. I have to protect my family. Also, this is Texas. Take that, you Republican gun nuts! Even though Schwarzenegger has a tank in real life. Also, when our young Arnold Terminator is established, a few decades pass and now he's a goofy, lovable old man Terminator that has developed more human emotions and the organic skin on the outside has aged. Terminator Genesis and Dark Fate. The new future of the Resistance, Danny, has a dumb speech where she says she wants to stand and fight them just like in Transformers 5.
I want to stay, and I want to fight them.
Oh wait, wrong franchise. Also, Grace tells a story of the future when she was a little girl and is saved by a older Danny who already knows who she is because of the events of this movie you are watching. Very similar to when John Connor meets Kyle Reese in Salvation, who is unaware he is John's future father and is very important to the future. After gaining access to a restricted facility from a black guy working on the inside, our characters then get in a big delivery vehicle and are being chased by a Terminator in a helicopter. T2 is the SWAT van being chased by the T-1000 in a helicopter. This, our characters are in some military cargo hold plane being chased by the Rev 9 in a helicopter. Helicopter is destroyed and then both Terminators acquire another vehicle. Proceeding is a car chase with aircraft. In Terminator Genesis, our characters have a car chase in the sky with helicopters. This one, the Rev 9 steals another big plane and then catches up to them in the sky, and after this whole movie is established how indestructible this new Rev 9 Terminator is, rather than just crashing his plane into the other one, both blowing up and incinerating all humans on board, he just knocks his plane into their plane just so he can grapple onto it like with his arm spikes, just like in T2 when he's hanging off the cop car. Oh yeah, and the Rev 9 also does this in the movie earlier in the highway chase. Sorry, I'm forgetting my direct imagery stealing. Then they take the dumb idea from the A-Team movie where they're in a vehicle flying through the sky, and when they hit the ground they don't die, especially this elderly woman. Grandma got some strong bones. Terminator crashed into the water and then thought to be dead, but just like in Terminator Genesis, yeah, he's back. They all end up in the facility that they didn't plan on. Robotics factory in The Terminator, melting plant from Terminator 2, and here it's like under Hoover Dam with a frozen Megatron. A new take here is rather than running around the facility, where you achieve the most luckiest break in human history, crushing the T-800 in a press and shooting the T-1000 into a molten metal pool, they have a standoff. This movie is ending with the fist fight. There is this moment in Terminator 2 where the T-1000 is trying to relate to Sarah Connor, making a call out to John so he comes back to danger. In this one, the Rev 9 says like, "Why don't you just give me the girl?" And then he says some cocky shit to the old man Arnold, "We're both made for the same purpose." And then Sarah Connor says some sassy shit like, "We don't negotiate with metal motherfuckers."
Remember when Carl Reese said metal motherfuckers? Oh yeah, I remember.
And when all hope is lost, the Rev 9 is just too powerful and indestructible. There is no way to defeat it. Suddenly, Grace remembers Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, when Arnold pulls out the power cell from his stomach and shoves it into the T-X's mouth. Grace makes Danny pull out her power core out of her guts, which then sacrifices her, and then Arnold gets to shove it into the mouth of the Rev 9. The Carl and Rev 9 fall into a pit, and he holds onto the Rev 9 with the power core about to explode. And just like in Terminator Genesis when he's about to sacrifice himself along with the T-3000 evil John Connor, there is a moment where everything gets quiet, and then he says, "Kyle Reese, protect my Sarah." In this, it all goes quiet, and he looks up at Sarah Connor and says, "For John. Remember this moment in Terminator 2 Judgment Day." And then, as mentioned before, the nice guy T-800 sacrificing himself, and a sad Sarah Connor and a young savior of humanity standing next to her are also just so sad. And just before it's all over, young Danny gets to see the young version of her future savior Grace as a child, just like in Genesis. Sarah Connor gets to talk to a young Kyle Reese. Also, it's at a children's public jungle gym, like Sarah Connor's nightmare sequence in T2. Oi, nah, fuck you. I love the movie. This is the best since Terminator 2. It had sick action. You just nitpick too much. Do you even fucking like movies? It's just like your opinion, bro. This was the time to break the Terminator mold. We needed the biggest shakeup, but my god, it's now officially confirmed. We can never ever get out of Terminator 2. That's the template. We can't change the template. One of the worst things to come out of this movie is just how done Schwarzenegger is as this character. He was so threatening and great in the original. Both he and James Cameron knew him being the villain would play the best to his strengths. A muscly, strong, evil robot. He has a weird accent, keeping it to a minimum. The only reason he was in the sequel is because he was such a massive star. Terminator launched his career into the stratosphere, and making his character the good guy was officially the last original change to his character. Now it's either the next time we see his Terminator character, it will have to be a new model, and it has to be evil again. But then 3, Genesis, and now Dark Fate, dragging that good guy Terminator through the dirt. It's not fun anymore. It's not cool anymore. He is so fucking old. Also, the more you think about it, these being infiltration units gaining trust over the humans, how many 6-foot ripped Austrian weirdos with a gap tooth have to shoot up shit in public until people start pointing fingers? T2, they were already onto it. The guy who shot up the police station was in the mall. What's all that about? Even in the original, they have another Terminator that was not played by Schwarzenegger. What was wrong with that? The Sarah Connor Chronicles had to do it because they couldn't afford Schwarzenegger. It was a TV show. That also brings me to the problem of the Terminators with liquid metal skin that can mimic anything. I get it. You need an actor to play this role so people can keep track of it. But at this point, why would the Rev 9 have a locked-in character that he always plays? If he's the most dangerous Terminator ever made, why would he ever return to one form? Why not just keep hopping from personality to personality? You would never ever see him coming. But nah, that's too confusing. And this is why I like Terminator Salvation so much. Terminator Salvation isn't that good of a movie, but it is the best movie since Terminator 2 because it changes the template. And the whole Eddie Furlong is returning bullshit. Not in the movie. Digitally de-aged, 2 different child actors performing the motion capture and voice. Why say he was in it? My theory is they paid him to say he was in it, so everyone would expect old fat junkie John Connor. But bam! We get you right at the start when he's shot as a kid and dies. About 50% of Sarah Connor in this movie was great. Showed the possibilities of a great story where her and John could return. But most of this film, she's just a sassy bitch, and you don't feel the weight of John Connor actually being killed. What was so wrong about having Eddie Furlong's character be in this movie? And even the age and state that he's in right now. Skynet never happened. Sarah finally got to be the parent she never was before the events of T2. But nah, why did she have to be the Han Solo of this movie? She gets to hang around with all of the young blood, but Luke has to be nothing and die, and Arnold and Leia just sit down. So apparently with this new loophole with 80s film properties, if it's older than 35 years, the rights can go back to whoever owned the script or something. And apparently the Terminator rights can go back to Gail Ann Hurd, the former co-producer and ex-wife of James Cameron. And I hope for the love of fuck, if that happens, she does absolutely nothing with it. Put Terminator on a shelf and let the fucking thing collect dust. We will never get out of the first two movies, and this was the time to make it worth it. It was not worth it. If James Cameron coming back did nothing, then Terminator is done. No more it's the best since T2. Let's just go back to rewatching T2 and that's it. And this movie is bombing and losing money, which is all good news to me. A Terminator 1 and 2 clone after all the other clones does not deserve to make profit, because we will have to sit through other clones. The time has come for these old franchises to die. It's now time to watch it descent into molten lava, and we can all look down at it with a sad face, and then move on. The most honest thing in this movie comes from Arnold himself. How many times they reword "I'll be back" and finally he says, "I won't be back." I hope that's a promise. I would rather rewatch Terminator 2 than have to watch something that's the best thing since Terminator 2, but it's not as good. Every sequel since T2 has been the best movie since T2, no more.